So, hi, Danny Herskowitz here from Elliott Scott HR. Really happy today to have three other amazing guests that are joining us today for a really interesting topic: women in mobility leading through a crisis. So, Sophia, Lynn, and Olivia, thank you so much for joining us today, and glad to be a part of this to talk about some really interesting things. So, yeah, would love to kind of go around the room, so to speak, and talk through a little bit more about your backgrounds, what you do at your companies, and a little bit more about yourselves. So, Lynn, would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am the founder and CEO of a mobile app called Pivt, which is an app designed specifically to reduce churn and improve the well-being of relocated and mobile employees. So it was actually started out of my own experience, relocating to London with my employer at the time, which was Bloomberg. And being 21 and not knowing anyone there and facing the issue that I think all people do when moving to a new and unfamiliar place, which is how do you go about making your new city feel like home? And there were two things that I really needed. The first was information on my city from people I trusted. Where do you live? Which bank do you join? Where do you take your mom for dinner when she comes to visit? Things you don't want to rely on a Google or a TripAdvisor for. And then the second piece is how do you recreate your network from scratch? Because it's friends you need the most when you're adjusting to a new and unfamiliar place. So out of this frustration came Pivt, and thank you for having me. Looking forward to taking part.
Great. Olivia, tell us a little bit about your company, about Prime Communications.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, Danny and Elliott Scott HR. It's a pleasure to be here among such great company, amazing women in mobility, and you, Danny, from Elliott Scott HR. So my name is Olivia Bahrami. I'm the founder and CEO of Prime Communications, which is a global mobility communications firm. So we specialize in strategic, customized, and compelling corporate communications for relocation management companies and global mobility service providers. So I've been in the relo space for over 5 years, and I initially started with a mid-sized relocation management company. And 3 years into my job there, I was actually laid off from my corporate job while pregnant. And so that situation, that unfortunate situation, has given me the push to pursue entrepreneurship. And here I am about 1.5 years in, and I love what I do. I work with some amazing clients and people in the industry. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much once again, and I look forward to an awesome discussion.
Thanks, Olivia. Sophia, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Danny, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with you guys. So my name is Sofia Bentinck, and I am the founder and CEO of Anchor Relocation Worldwide, based out of Mexico. We provide destination services, immigration, and household goods tenancy management in Mexico and throughout the world via our partners. And the company was born 12 years ago out of my own experience. So I relocated to Mexico and found the whole thing just completely overwhelming. And then continued to meet expats who were here as well, who kind of had the same experience. There wasn't a lot of information out there readily available, and Latin America tends to be a little bit more tricky for those who maybe don't speak the language. And so that's how the company was born. That was 12 years ago, and today we are still strong and happy to be supporting people who are coming into Mexico or out of the country into others. So thank you very much for having me.
Great, and just to give you a little bit of information on Elliott Scott. So Elliott Scott HR is a specialist HR recruitment firm. We serve our clients in Hong Kong, London, Sao Paulo, Singapore, and New York, which is the office that I'm working for, our US operation. And 6 years ago, Elliott Scott Mobility was launched, which is what I oversee. So I work with all types of companies within the global mobility industry. So that's relocation management companies, moving and storage companies, expatriate tax consultancies, and in-house mobility roles. So we help candidates find new jobs, and we help clients find candidates. So that's a little bit about what we do. But I really I'd love to kind of start things off. Obviously, we've called this this topic leading through a crisis. So I think it's been a crisis for all of us. So yeah, would love to kind of get your thoughts on all of you guys in terms of what have been some of the challenges that you've faced, but not only the challenges, but also the successes, because I think with every negative, there's a positive. So yeah, would love to hear, what you guys have experienced, and yeah. So Lynn, tell us a little bit about, what you've seen kind of in your own experience through this.
So the one silver lining of all of this, I think, is that there's really been, a greater focus and attention on employee well-being. And I hope that's something that continues throughout the new normal. So we've certainly seen it in, the uptake of clients that have been reaching out to us in regards to our services. And I think now more than ever, people are starting to see that the ROI is really attached to some of those soft service HR benefits. So it's not just the right thing to do by way of the employee and their family members, but it actually is attached to the ROI. So that's really what we're seeing is, companies starting to invest in this space and really pay attention to it.
That's really interesting.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Olivia, what about yourself?
Yeah, so with regard to our own individual businesses, and in my own case particularly, I think we have all experienced some client loss, and also maybe some client acquirements, let's call it that. So for me, yeah, it was a little bit of up and down. So I experienced some client loss with regard to my own relocation management companies that I was partnering with, because they had to naturally furlough or lay off some of their own employees, which trickles down to individuals like myself who operate as a contractor, essentially as a service-based contractor for relocation management companies. So that was a little bit tough, and I didn't know how to navigate that because I'm still very new to business. I've only been in business for about a year and a half, so it's still quite new to me. But the upside of it has been that I have focused a lot more on content and sessions like these sessions, and that has generated some client. I acquired some clients through content, which is what we're doing here. We are producing content for our audience to see. So that has been good. I've also experienced a large uptick in RFPs in the last 3 to 4 months. So for those that don't know, RFPs stand for Request for Proposals. And a lot of content creation. So clients have been very adamant on taking this time to create content that is appealing and informative and engaging and action-oriented for their clients, for their employees, and for audience. So those have been some of my challenges. It's been a bit of a busy period. Actually, in the last 3-4 weeks, it's been quite busy. Now things are starting to slow down a little bit. So it's been a little bit difficult and a little bit fun and exciting as well.
That's great. That's great that you're busy. Sophia, what about you?
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, I mean, we have a perspective. My perspective is obviously from on the ground. So from providing destination services. From a business perspective, assignments and new arrivals went from, really busy to 0 overnight. So that was something that was kind of like a shock for everybody. But beyond that, in terms of our corporate clients and our assignees, we were really faced with a very sudden need from them to be able to become their allies in providing concise information as to what was going on. So, I'm talking about back when this first started in March, right? So we had to look at the best route to be able to take assignees out, if they were on their look and see trip, or if they were even, vacationing or on like a short-term assignment, being able to work with our clients to be able to see, what those next steps are going to be. And that turnaround time had to be so quick that what actually, interestingly enough, started happening was that they were kind of turning more to us because we were more agile in that aspect. We knew where people were, we knew where they were staying, getting people out or in, back home, whatever that might look like at the time for each client. We were actually able to pull that off really quickly. But that was a challenge because I think that there were not necessarily enough policies in place, or the policies weren't broad enough. I mean, nobody ever imagined that we would be living times like this, right? And so when this first began, it all kind of kicked off back in March. That was really a challenge for our clients, and we really partnered with them to kind of help them quickly move people around. And those that actually didn't manage to get flights back home, or in some of the countries in Latin America that closed borders very, very quickly with very little information, in advance, we helped them, find housing quickly and this kind of thing. And then as they started closing hotels, just the whole kind of process was very, very stressful for everybody. But that was a new need which hadn't really shown up before, in terms of us working with our clients and them needing us to provide that information in such a quick and timely and accurate manner. And then again, in Latin America, sometimes that's a little bit difficult to get. So getting that accurate information from on the ground, I think, was very important for them. But it was a real challenge for us because we were kind of working around the clock. And then, of course, you've got your own personal kind of stress level that everybody was dealing with whilst we were all figuring out what was going on. So in that regard, that was, I think, something that was a big challenge for us. The speed with which it all had to be done as well. So, yeah.
Any successes that have come through this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the fact that we had the information first as well for our clients was super valuable. So we're actually able to help, people get on flights and help people move around faster, be able to provide transport and that housing that I mentioned, to provide them with solutions very, very quickly, was something that for us was really great. And you know what, even, we were talking a little bit, Lynn was saying, the personal aspect behind this, the sensitivity, just sometimes being on the phone with some of our assignees, for them to have somebody to listen to. I think we're going to talk maybe a little bit later about some interesting surveys we have from assignees that didn't necessarily get the support that they were hoping to from their employer, and maybe not because they didn't want to, but because everyone was kind of dealing with all of this all of a sudden. Being there for them was very gratifying as well. Sometimes it just meant being on the phone whilst they were waiting at the airport trying to get on a flight, that kind of thing. So that's definitely been something that's shown a much more personal aspect and kind of high touch, hands-on side to relocation that I think is often forgotten.
Yeah, that's great. I think we've all become, in our own ways, like therapists, so for me, it's been kind of similar. When it first, here in the US, when COVID really hit in end of March, April, we were in a situation where it was very uncertain for people. It was an uncertain time. We were working with candidates that were about to start jobs, and they were expecting to start those jobs in person. But now that they were going to be working remotely and being onboarded virtually. And then working with our clients, they were concerned about, are the candidates ready to still start, or are they still interested in interviewing? So I think for us, that was definitely something we had to adapt to. But I think, I would say the real positive for that is similar to what you were saying, Sophia, is just being able to be there at the right speed for people. I think for me, this has really allowed me to empathize a lot more with people and build more deeper and meaningful connections with people than I ever have before, which I'm really proud of. And I think it's going to allow me to serve my candidates and clients better in the future.
Definitely. And I think it also shows up where the gaps are as well, Danny, with some of these things. There are policies in place, and perhaps, our clients think that, or everybody at some point thinks, well, we've covered kind of all aspects, and it's not necessarily that way, and we can see that now. I don't know, I think Lynn, Pivt did a really interesting survey. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, but some of the percentages there of the people that have, they were not contacted by their employer quickly, or they felt that they were kind of alone, was really interesting.
Yeah, pretty startling. And I think, as you said, I think people are just, I think the true colors have really shown through this, and we're just seeing that, you know, companies can't do everything on their own, and there's a bandwidth problem, right? So for instance, we ran this survey. So for context, we interviewed about 200 expats in early April. And some of the really staggering statistics were that, you know, that 62% of, you know, lump sum people, you know, had a lot of trouble handling their relocation, and that, you know, 57% of them didn't have a chance to develop a support network before COVID happened. And this alongside with, you know, the fact that 74% of them didn't know anything about their healthcare system before COVID came up, you know, that's a combination for disaster. And, you know, the other thing that we found was that actually only 5% of transferees had heard from their RMC, and 57% had heard from their employers. And so if you don't know anything about, you know, the healthcare system, and you don't have a support network, and you're in a new place, and, you know, you don't know where to turn, that, you know, arises some really critical problems, you know, for the employee and also for the workforce.
That's really interesting. Lynn, what do you think companies can do to alleviate and solve some of these issues?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the things that I'm really excited that we're working on at Pivt is really, we're working with a social network scientist, and we're working with a couple of academics to really come up with what's the formula for the human side of relocation. Because what we've seen is that, you know, the punch list from A to B in terms of moving people from, you know, A to B, and from people moving their things, there's a clear checklist. The human side seems to fall through the cracks, and no one's really taking accountability for it. And again, that goes back to the bandwidth problem. It's no one's fault. It's just the RMCs and the corporations just don't have the bandwidth for that. So we're working with these people to, you know, look at studies, look at, you know, science, and see, okay, what can people do on our platform before they move, when they move, and after they move, so that we can, you know, boost their chance for success. So I think, you know, but the most important thing is really for employers to just provide some sort of support, you know, be there. I think there's nothing more important than showing up.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I actually think that brings us to our next topic, which we wanted to talk about, which is duty of care. You know, Lynn, as long as you're kind of telling us all about this, yeah, what are you seeing now in terms of duty of care with employers and the employee?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's much more important, as I said, and I think that's been one of the silver linings of COVID. And I think, you know, what we're also seeing is that retention was a problem before COVID, just in terms of millennials wanting to switch jobs so frequently, and, you know, a bunch of different things, and different work styles that would attract talent. And I think they're starting to look at it, you know, more holistically, because retention now is really going to filter into, you know, well-being and duty of care. You know, the company happy hours in the office and the free snacks, you know, are no longer going to be a way to retain talent. So, you know, more importantly, it's going to be the mental health, including the families from day one. How are you supporting your employees, especially when they're working remotely, and, you know, they're not getting that social support, they're not, you know, getting that pat on the back from their managers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to me, that's kind of sad about the free snacks.
Maybe they can send them, but
Uber Eats.
So Olivia, you know, obviously your communication, right? That's your expertise. What are you seeing from that perspective, from a communication perspective, when it comes to this?
Yeah, so I think duty of care, you know, this used to be a buzzword back in Relo, and I want to say maybe 2016, 2017. it used to be all about duty of care. And I remember when I went to the ERC conference in 2017, and this was like a huge theme. So that was kind of like a big thing then. But duty of care in a global pandemic, it's an absolute must. You have to take ownership of ensuring the health and wellness of your employees, your clients, and your organization, whatever that may look like. And one of the things that I realized as I think about this global pandemic from a communication standpoint is two key themes. Safety and communication have been at the forefront of managing this pandemic. And if you think about us in relocation, right? I've seen at least an uptick of more engagement, user engagement on social channels like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the other social channels, because people are at home. People are missing that human interaction, that social interaction that we all crave and live for, right? Because we're human beings and we need that to thrive and survive. And so I think that's been one of the key themes that I've seen myself, as I said, is the with regard to duty of care, is having a commitment to creating communications that is accessible and action oriented and engaging and informative. We need to engage with our audience so that we understand what information they're seeking, because right now, and even when COVID first hit, people were dying for information. Even now on TV, if you turn on the TV, in the media, they're talking about COVID, right? What you see in the news, they're talking about COVID. Same thing with us in relocation. We're all talking about it. We're trying to figure out what the next steps are. And of course, we don't have a crystal ball as much as we would like to, right? But we don't. So we're trying to navigate through these really trying times to see and help our clients, their employees, and our audience to move forward in a positive manner. So definitely with regard to duty of care, communication and keeping the emotional side of things and keeping having a relationship with our audience is incredibly important. That's one of the key things key themes that I've seen since COVID first hit and even now.
Yeah. I mean, that's all really, really positive in a way. You know, we actually, in our company, Elliott Scott did a survey, a global survey, and we found some interesting stats, which were actually pretty positive. We found that before the pandemic, 64% of the respondents said that their company was providing them with mental health support. But during the pandemic, 82% of the respondents said that their company was providing them with the mental health support that they needed. So over half of them were offered access to counseling and various workshops specifically toward mental health. So I think that's a really positive thing, that people are saying that, and that people are being supported by their companies throughout this, which is great. You know, even in my own company, I would say, they've encouraged us, which I think is, it gets a little bit tricky. We're all working from home, annual leave, things like that, right? So, encouraging us to make sure that we're taking the time off that we need to, which is imperative to mental health. So, Sophia, obviously being an owner of a relocation company, what kind of trends are you seeing now, over the past 6 months, from your perspective?
Sure. I think that, and just going back a little bit to what Olivia was saying as well, I think that part of this, not only is it communication, but it's also preparation. I think that there is an element that is so important to, before we start doing anything, to see how we need to prepare. And because each client is different and each situation and each family is different. And I think that that's something that for a lot of us DSPs, we're always kind of shouting out to remember that aspect of relocation, right? So here in Latin America, things have been, very different, changing a lot in different countries. Preparing to be able to deliver services is also, it's a challenge. And then obviously talking to each client that we have to see what their policies are and how they want us to handle it. And then not only that, you then have to also talk to the consultant and see what he or she is willing to do. And the same with the family. Do they take the 14 days quarantine even if it's not mandated by the local government? So this kind of thing, it just becomes now part of our daily lives. And within the company, all of my employees are women, funnily enough. And I think that, discussing here women in mobility, I think that we really need to remember as well the fact that there are a lot of women and probably men, some maybe single parents, that are trying to deal with this whole situation while, working whilst also doing childcare. And I know that in the US, a lot of schools have gone back, but for example, here in Mexico, they haven't gone back. And I don't think they will until January. So being sensitive to what is going on and really supporting employees with juggling that, it's difficult. And I think that the fact that we're all home and everyone perhaps, I think because of the fact that you're accommodating childcare and work, you end up perhaps doing some work out of office hours, and then that is now becoming like a thing where people are contacting you out of office hours and perhaps expecting you to reply, at least here, because everyone knows that you're still home. Because there's, here in Latin America, we're still very much, a lot of things are still closed. And so that becomes a real challenge for all of us. And I think that in terms of recruiting as well, that's something important to talk to, because it cannot be a disadvantage for single parents or for mothers, who need to go back to work or looking for a new job. To be at a disadvantage because of that, because at the end of the day, they have to take care of that personal aspect and their children, especially if they're young age children.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a parent of two young kids myself, every day I've had conversations with people who are saying the exact same thing. So it'll be interesting to see how companies adapt to this and are able to help us that have kids, so we can balance work and families, which has not been easy these past few months. Lynn, what are you seeing in terms of trends within relocation, mobility, and just kind of Pivt in general, and how you're adapting to that?
Yeah, I think from a relocation standpoint, we've tried to cast a broad net to kind of learn what's going on in the landscape. And I've been, really excited to hear that for the most part, I think, I think close to 60% of moves are going on as planned. And some, industries like pharmaceuticals and the government are really not affected by COVID, which I think is a good sign. I've also heard that, there's been an increase in RFPs, and that, a lot of companies are not, throwing away the relocations altogether, but just backlogging them. So I think, that's really a great sign as well. And then, from the other standpoint, I read recently that 1 in 5 people have relocated due to COVID-19. And that's more on the employee side, but people are certainly starting to see that maybe if they don't have to commute into the office 5 days a week, they can, buy a place with more room and, spend a little bit more time commuting and whatnot. And so I think that opens a whole new range of opportunity, both from the HR standpoint and supporting these people, and for the global mobility market, because I don't think that this is going to be the end of it. What I will say, another positive thing for the relocation space is I've spoken to a number of heads of global mobility and, specifically high tech firms. And it's been really interesting to hear that they said that, as soon as they can go back into the office, they're going to start doing so. And the reason being is that it's so hard to create a strong culture online. And the tools to monitor their employees just aren't there yet. And so while this is, fine for the time being and a little bit of a Band-Aid, it's certainly not something that they're looking to implement long-term.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Everything you just said. Olivia, what are you seeing in terms of, I know you mentioned, Lynn, about increase in RFPs. I mean, is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I ran a mobility survey in, I think, April. I was surveying relocation management companies and service providers to understand how the marketing and corporate communications function has been affected in COVID-19. And I have a couple of stats that I'm happy to share today. So 73% of respondents of the survey believe that content creation is very important in COVID-19. And to add to that, 93% of them created COVID-specific communication. So that just goes back to the whole notion of communication is incredibly important. People are craving and dying to understand what's going on, what's the next step, where are we going with this pandemic, and how is everything being managed. So I think communication is always going to remain at the forefront of managing a pandemic. But for us in Relo, some of the things that my clients have been working on with regard to content creation during this time is things like newsletters, white papers, case studies, and then, as I mentioned, some RFPs as well. Some RMCs have seen a tremendous uptick in RFPs. Some have seen a few, and some have selected not to respond to some RFPs, depending on their strategy and going forward. And so it's been interesting. I didn't think that there would be this much emphasis on communication, but I'm pleased as somebody who lives in this space, who lives and breathes in this space, to see that organizations are really taking the time to inform their employees, inform their clients, and also using content creation as an opportunity to gain business, right? Because I think a lot of businesses have been affected, right, in this time period. So yeah, it's been very interesting. Some of the other things I've seen that clients are working on is reevaluating their marketing strategy. Given the fact that they've lost clients, they're really evaluating to see, is this the right strategy going forward? Are we missing something? Can we add to what we already have implemented? So it's a give and take of what's happening, and with the resources that they have. And yeah, so I'm really pleased to see that communications continue to be front and center. And I think throughout this whole pandemic, we will continue to see lots of that.
Yeah, it's great. It's really interesting, kind of similar to that. We, on our survey as well, we found that 71% of the respondents said that their company handled the pandemic well. And a lot of this has to do, is this great feedback for HR because of the communication, because of these strategies that they've come up with to communicate what's going on to employees. So clearly people are saying that their companies are handling this well in the best way that they can, which I think we all are, or we're trying to at least. So yeah, any parting thoughts? Where do you see the next 6 months? What do you guys think? Sophia, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that personalized delivery service is just going to be, something that is going to be so important over the next couple of months, because as we've talked about, this isn't the end, unfortunately. There are some countries that have been going back down into lockdown, maybe locally, not the whole country. So the ability to be agile, to make those changes quickly, to be able to speak to the person and not to the assignment, preparation, I think in terms of destination services, that is definitely going to be something that is going to be at the forefront. And I think those of us who are able to meet that, where it's at, are going to be the ones that really are going to thrive in this environment. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
that's great. And Lynn, where do you see Pivt in the next 6 months, and how will that kind of play a role in everything?
Yeah, well, first of all, I completely agree with Sophia. I think that those companies that are willing to change, as hard as it may be, and stay on their toes, are really going to be the ones that, are not just landing on their feet, but are, and in this case, on their way for survival. I think that those that don't innovate are just not going to survive. In terms of Pivt, I really hope that we can help companies understand the importance of employee well-being and social isolation, and then really, help those employees, in places around the world, really connect with others that are in the same situation as them and seek the trusted advice that they need and the support that they need in the palm of their hands. For $6 a month per user, it shouldn't be that difficult to, provide some sort of advocacy to their employees.
That's great. Olivia, what about you? What do where do you see communication fitting into all this over the next few months?
Yeah, I think two key themes that I've just been thinking about as we've been having this amazing conversation is being proactive and being flexible. That's not going to change. We're going to need to ensure that we maintain those characteristics within communications and the way we communicate with our clients, with our employees, being proactive, listening to what our clients and employees and audience want to know. Let's tap into that, right? It's almost like doing market research, you know, trying to understand what the audience out there needs to hear from us, and being flexible in the way we approach our communications and our projects. Because I think as I think about my own organization, I'm thinking about, we need to adapt. We need to adapt to the new now, or the new normal, whatever terminology you prefer to use. Adapt or you won't survive. I like what Lynn said about, you know, some innovators won't last. You need to really have a solid business plan going forward and be willing to adapt to change, so that you can grow and thrive.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Lynn, Olivia, and Sophia for joining us today. Hopefully we'll all be able to adapt and get through this, and we can all get through